Welcome to the online program Influence with Skill. In this brief introduction, we'll cover the basics of the course, what the course is about, what it'll take from you to be successful and take advantage of this course, and also a bit of what is it that is meant by influence in this particular program. So here's what we're going to do. And the objectives of the program are to increase your ability to influence those people who are around you. And part of this is going to be, can you influence people regardless of your position or authority in the organization? We want to be able to do that by relying on a wider range of influence styles, to be able to have a model for looking at those particular styles, and then to become more effective at applying those influence styles with those that you attempt to influence on a regular basis in the work that you do. It's important to know that influence is subject with many layers and dimensions. We know this intuitively, but it's useful to think about it. Power has an influence on how we are influential or not. Our own tacit and unconscious habits and thinking have an impact on how influential we can be. There's instinct and our instinctual response to circumstances that occur around us that also have an influence on us. Our emotions can play an incredibly powerful role in how influential we are and how we are influenced. And of course, culture, our particular history, background, and personal story play a part in how we attempt to influence and how others' influence attempts are perceived by us. And finally, the area that we're going to focus on for this program has to do with the ability of ourselves to have awareness of how we're trying to be influenced and the skills that we attempt to deploy to influence others. So we want to be both aware of how we're going about influencing and be aware of the skills that we have at our disposal to be able to influence others. The program elements in our focus for this will be, one, awareness, and a model. We'll be working with a model that comes from Decision Learning, Inc., and we'll also be using the Influence Style Inventory. If you haven't completed that, you will very shortly. That'll form the basis for how we'll proceed. We'll focus on skills and the skills that are derived from the Influence Style Inventory and the model that we'll be working with. You want to understand your style preference, and that'll come out as you look at the Influence Style Inventory. Think about specific influence skills and tactics, the ones you use, the ones you currently may be underusing, how you might be overutilizing your strengths, where there's opportunities for you to grow your capacity. And then it'll require, in this program, to practice applying those skills. If we're going to increase behaviorally our skills, our behavioral skills, it requires practice. It's not enough just to read or understand or even listen to someone else talk about it. For one to improve their skills in the behavioral context, you must apply. We've got some resources that you can count on for this. One is the Influence Style Inventory. There are some video presentations like this one and some others that give you examples of how people might apply some of the specific skills and tactics for influence in a given situation. The discussion forums that will take place on this site that you'll interact with both the site facilitator and with your peers and colleagues who are participating in this program. And finally, we'll be asking you to keep an online journal for which you can record your own thoughts and do a bit of reflection that is oftentimes very valuable and hard to get in a day-to-day situation. And of course, the real last thing is engaging in live practice. You'll have some assignments that will require that you interact with folks in your work environment and work context. And to be able to reflect on that and bring your experience, however good or bad you find it to be, back to the class and the online discussion forums. The flow will be fairly simple. This is Module 1. We're in the middle of Introduction to Influence. It is a requirement before we move on that you complete the ISI survey. So if you haven't done that, please see the link that allows you to do that. You should have gotten an email by this point. And please do complete that survey. There's a discussion forum with some reflection questions, and we'll get to those, and those are contained in the Spark site, and a personal journal reflection activity. In Module 2, we'll look at the model behind the influence styles inventory. And you'll get a chance to spend some time diving into that and pulling apart not only the styles, but the specific skills that enable those styles to be expressed. We've got a quiz associated with that, some more personal journal reflection. In this reflection, we'd like you to think about the specific complaints you might have in your workplace, and not complaints about the organization, but complaints about how others interact with you in your work. And also ask you to identify maybe places where you have disagreements with folks with whom you work. And we'll take a look at how we can apply different influence skills to both those complaints and to the disagreements. Finally, in Module 3, we'll look specifically at the results of your influence styles inventory and what does it tell you about your particular approach to influencing others. We'll read and review it, we'll have some discussion forum activities, and again, personal journal reflection. In Module 4, you'll get a chance to practice specific influence behaviors. And those behaviors will be around practicing assertive behavior as it regards complaints in the workplace, and practicing inquiry, trying to influence when disagreements occur without pushing your perspective onto others. Of course, there'll be another discussion forum as we look at what was it like to practice being assertive with those complaints, and what was it like to attempt to inquire, and pretty much only inquire or restate in the face of disagreements. And in Module 5, it's about putting it all together in your world. How do you look at those different elements of influence that we've been discussing in both a case example, a discussion forum, and your personal plan for influence in a particular situation? How are we going to do this? There's some simple steps to doing it. The design of the program, it's about behavior change. It's about you shifting your behavior and thinking in order to be more effective at influencing others. We can't be successful at you having an opportunity to learn unless there's some shift in your thinking and in your behavior as it pertains to influence and influence situations. So at a high level, here's what we'll do. We'll take a look at a model for influencing others. You'll review your personal diagnostic report, your ISI survey. You'll practice skills to improve your ability to influence effectively. You'll prepare a plan and have a peer review. Folks who are participating with you in this program will have a chance to give you some feedback about your plan for influencing in your particular context and the influence challenges that you face. It'll take something out of you as well. You need to invest in this program in particular ways. Here's some of the things that we'll ask you to do. One is be a learner. And being a learner requires sometimes that you're willing to do something different and discover what it is that happens to you when you do. Learning can often be a situation or a process that involves discomfort. So the measure of success for this isn't, are you feeling good? The measure of success is learning taking place. What we know about learning is oftentimes the act of struggle, the ability to face less than perfect results, and then return and continue to engage is both the process of mastery and learning. It also seems to impact the very shape of our brain. We want to reflect on your own experience using the online journal, keeping that as a record for yourself. Share your thoughts with others in the discussion forums. Be willing to be open, be willing to be a bit vulnerable. And be willing to push each other where it seems appropriate. Be willing to challenge each other's thinking in the spirit of learning and the spirit of support to one another. We also want you to focus on your areas of growth. And when you look at the ISI survey, there'll be lots of ways that we can identify chances and opportunities for you to grow, but to really have an honest assessment of, okay, if I'm going to be more influential, what are the areas in which I can really dedicate myself to some kind of practice, and be willing to work on those. It'll also mean that you have to spend some time reading, thinking, and working in the groups that we will set up in this program, and be willing to engage in practice outside of the program with people in real interactions. and finally helping others to learn. So that's the introduction. But when it gets down to it, what are we talking about when we're talking about influence? What is influence? If you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, this definition is pretty simple: the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or of something. And so you might represent that in a simple diagram. There's me, and I have someone else that I'm trying to influence. And typically how we think about this is I engage in an attempt to influence the other. Most of how we think about this influence is me attempting to push my ideas and my thinking onto others. And if you think about this, it involves a lot of different kinds of skills or behaviors to influence others, but the pure energy of it is a push kind of energy, where my thoughts, my perspective, my way of seeing things is pushed onto the other person. And that's a reasonable thing to think about when we think about influence, but it's not the whole story. As we look at influence in this particular context, one of the things that we'll focus on is also how willing am I to be influenced? And part of that influence is how willing am I to understand the other person? How willing am I to find common ground? How willing am I to engage in give and take with the other person? Actually has an influence not only on the other person, but on me as I try to do that. This has a feel of much more pull, where I'm attempting to draw from the other person, draw some bridges, find connections, try and understand, really engage with them in such a way that I am influenced. And maybe this is one of the questions to ask: are you willing to be influenced? But I'm influenced in a way that allows me to influence the other person. And that's a bit of the challenge. So we'll be engaging in that as we go through this program. And it's worth also considering, what influences you? And there's lots of things. Behavioral science gives us a whole range of influences that impact us at an unconscious level. There's great studies that show us that holding a hot beverage or even a cold beverage, depending on which one you're holding, has an influence how you perceive the people who are around you. When you're holding a hot beverage, you tend to see those around you as much warmer than when you hold a cold beverage. Holding a cold beverage leads you to an assumption about folks around you that they're maybe standoffish or a little bit distant. There's a really fascinating set of studies that are associated with counting money and priming. And the experiments have been done with, the research is based on the difference between counting money and counting paper. And there's a couple of different ways that they've approached this. One is how many candies or M&Ms does someone eat when they count money versus when they count paper. And another whole series of activities that when you count money versus count paper, how much pain can you endure, particularly in sticking your hand in freezing cold water. And the fascinating part of these studies is that when you count money as opposed to count paper, you're going to eat more sugar, more sweets. And when you count money versus count paper, your capacity to endure cold water in particular and endure pain goes up. So there's something about this notion of priming that has an influence on us in very interesting ways. Of course, many of you may be familiar with the broken window theory of crime. At the essence of the broken window theory of crime is that even tolerating small deviation from the stated rules leads to a generalized and increasingly difficult Then there's the broken window theory of crime. Many of you are familiar with this. The basics of that is that even with a small deviation from the stated rules or laws, if someone breaks a law in a small way, what begins to happen is that sets a precedent, and others break the law at an increasingly greater level. The broken window theory of crime being that if you break one window and leave it untreated or allow the perpetrator to go unpunished, soon all the windows will be broken. And we are also influenced by great acts of kindness, humility, courage. I Am Malala resonates deeply with many of us and inspires us to action. And then another emotion that really influences us, and media and politicians are very good at playing this, is fear. And fear will lead us into action in an instinctive response. So what influences us? There's so many things: context, emotions, the desire to belong, in evolutionary terms, to be part of the pack. Our own body and sensations and hunger can have an impact on us. When we see specific behaviors and nonverbal cues, body language and tone, we respond to that as well. So it's going on all the time, and it's impacting us in ways that we're aware of and ways that we're not aware of. But the important thing to remember is that in this particular program and in our personal effectiveness at work, influence depends on our ability to be effective in conversation. And that's where we'll focus in this program. How effective are you in conversation at influencing those around you? And there are three important factors to consider in conversation when we're trying to influence others. You know, who do we want to influence? I know this is obvious, and it's important to be very clear about it. Is the influence target the actual target we want to influence? So let's be deliberate about that. What are we trying to influence? What are we trying to actually get? Do we want somebody to behave differently? Do we want somebody to think differently? Do we want somebody to just really listen to us? Or do we need some resources from someone? Maybe their time, maybe their attention. But be clear about what it is that we're trying to influence. And finally, how? How are we trying to influence that particular individual or those individuals in getting what it is that we want? And being somewhat deliberate about this makes a big difference. So as you think about what, here's some ways to think about it. You know, what are people giving you when you are attempting to influence them? Are you getting access to or shared resources? Are they giving you connections? Are they giving you their time and attention? They may be what you want is approval or agreement and perhaps decision rights in a situation. You might need alignment. You might simply need, I want to know that we're both together on this, that you're seeing this the way I am, and I'm going to act going forward. That might be what you're looking for. You might want them to take action and behave differently, and be specific about what you're looking for. And you might want to shift their thinking and focus to how you see things. Those are all the whats. When it gets to hows, we're going to use the ISI survey and the targeted skill practice in this program to be able to enable you to recognize and diagnose the influence situation and style used by another person, to increase the range of influence styles available to you, and to increase the range and effectiveness of the behaviors in your one-on-one interactions. Another important consideration when we're talking about influence is power. And of course, power comes from different sources, especially in organizations. There's three principal sources, but it is a critical variable in our ability to influence. We'll touch on this lightly now and go into it in more detail in future presentations. So here are the three different kinds. The first one is authority or formal positional power. And this power is power we're very familiar with. It's granted by the organization or the formal body, and it does give people individual control over resources, decisions, staffing. This is what we work on often in defining the terms of reference. So the terms of reference gives us that in the World Bank. There's also status power, and status power is different. It doesn't derive from the terms of reference. Its source comes from a different spot. And it's typically socially derived. And it's the nature of status power comes from the consent of the group. And as the group looks at an individual, it grants particular kinds of status based on expertise, respect, trust. There's a number of different factors that influence the status power. How you know you've got status power as opposed to authority power is when you It's interesting to watch someone without status power in a group try to assert that power, because usually the group will punish you. The group will take away that power, the group will demean somebody, the group will say things like, how can he think he can say that? Or, doesn't she know she can't do that? No. It's interesting to note that status power, while it doesn't parallel authority power, it is, no. Status power is most often seen when you can tell who influences people in an informal setting, who begins to be the thought leaders. And you can also see it when people assume a particular status power when they don't have it and it's not granted by the group. The group will take that person down a couple of pegs. The common language we hear when somebody tries to do that is, when status power is executed or used effectively, we think of those individuals as thought leaders. When individuals assume status power without the consent of the group, you often will hear comments like, who does he think he is? Or, she doesn't really know how things work around here. Different comments like that show that the group will take away the status power that someone may assume. And as we often say, take them down a peg or two. And lastly, the power that's afforded by the conversational skills. And that's what we're focusing on in this program. It's generated by the understanding of human nature and the ability to work with the human tendencies that exist and to be able to use both push and pull kinds of influence. We'll get into that in more detail as we go through the program. So once again, here are the program objectives. You can read them at your leisure. And really what it requires of you.